Ago, we showed you how young children are enticed by guns no matter how strong the warning. Tonight, we turn our hidden cameras on older kids, teenagers, who are so often drawn to guns as lethal playthings or to settle scores. We have been working on this story for months, and you should know that our experiments were conducted with the permission of the parents, and afterwards the teens themselves agreed to let us show you the results. Good kids, ordinary kids, but can they resist a fatal attraction? The boy you are watching is struggling to make a decision. Under slightly different circumstances, it's the kind of decision that could cost him or someone he loves their life. The paper bag on the shelf, the one he's just found, contains a real gun. He's about to decide whether to play with it, or turn it in, or take it with him. And he's just one of more than 50 other teenagers who didn't know they were part of an experiment with hidden cameras designed to learn about teenagers faced with the temptation of a real gun, and whether even those who were the most educated about guns really grasped the danger and the consequences. What happened in this experiment startled us and sent shockwaves through the parents who thought they knew their kids.
Oh, God.
Well, we don't really know a lot about how teenagers behave around guns.
To help design our experiment, we consulted Dr. Marjorie Hardy, professor of psychology at Florida's Eckerd College.
There is an element of maturity between the age of 4 and 14. But are you seeing maturity, or are you just seeing savviness?
We start the experiment with lectures by Lieutenant Joe Hanna of the Allentown, Pennsylvania Police, in Allentown and in Yonkers, New York. He gives half our recruited kids, ages 13 to 18, talks about guns and death and all the reasons they should call an adult immediately if they find a gun.
And I certainly hope that you would do what's right when you leave here today.
The teenagers listen intently and leave, not knowing some of them will be seeing us again. A few weeks later, we return to the two locations, the YMCA in Yonkers, New York, where we placed 2 pistols in a storage room, a 9mm Glock semi-automatic and a .357 Magnum revolver. And here, the Boys and Girls Club in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where we also placed 2 guns in an exercise room, one in the box with the free weights and one in a locker. In both locations, the guns have been disabled by police officers who are working with us.
That gun's not gonna fire.
Here in Allentown, as the tapes begin to roll, a group of teens enter the room, discover the guns. And right away, we're surprised at their immediate transformation. These ordinary school kids are fired up with excitement, savvy about guns, and secret plans.
Check. The bullet in my teeth.
These boys are so pumped up, they run to get a friend. And this boy says, "I'm keeping it." His name is Joshua, and he and his friends dart back and forth from the gun to the door and back again to see if any adults are coming. His mother, watching our tape, is dismayed.
It upsets me just watching him grab that gun like that, just going at it.
Joshua later denies he was going to take the gun, but does his mother think he was going to take it?
Yes, my answer would be yes.
We watched still other boys become furtive. Look what this one does with his sleeve. And the moment this teen spots the gun, he gets a pair of gloves and puts them on, making sure they won't leave fingerprints. Upon finding the gun, this kid immediately tries to load it with the clip. And watch closely the boy in black sitting on the floor. He is squeezing the trigger 6 times. He even aims one shot at his friend before getting smacked and pushed away. Again, they don't know that the guns are disabled and anything could have happened. Which raises that question again. How much can adults really expect impulsive teenagers to behave responsibly in the presence of guns? Research studies have shown that when adolescents see a gun, their blood pressure, heart rates, even hormone levels increase.
He's all excited.
It happens again here at the YMCA in Yonkers, where we set up that workroom and rigged 7 hidden cameras. As we said, police officers have made sure safe.
Okay, looks like we're ready to go.
We take the 2 pistols along with an ammunition clip loaded with dummy bullets and stash them on a shelf behind these cans of paint, where soon kids will come in to move the cans. In cooperation with us, the YMCA director calls in the kids to do a chore, among them some who had received our gun lecture. They're asked to move cans of paint from the shelves onto a dolly and come get the director when they're finished. Here, as in Allentown, the girls are almost always scared of the guns. Sounding the alarm, getting help. But once again, the boys are a different story. This boy is so riveted by the sight of the gun, he seems frozen in place. These boys are not only excited, they're savvy about what they find.
Someone has a Glock frame down here.
And even though eventually these boys will go and get the YMCA, look what they do before. They work the chamber. They look down the barrel. And this young man...
Just in case.
And here is inner conflict made visible. Another kid, Connor, lets out a sigh. Walks past the gun and thinks it over. Paces the room for a full 7 minutes before he summons the will to do the right thing. And what about 15-year-old Anthony, who had been at our warning lecture just weeks earlier and was so sure then about what he'd do if he came across a gun?
I had to call the cops and tell them that there was a gun there because I wouldn't want no kid to come and pick it up. You know?
Okay, so you would stay there to make sure no one would pick it up, and the next person you would say, hey, call the police, I found this gun.
So watch Anthony as he enters the room where we planted the guns. He finds them, and the war inside him begins. He pulls one out, then puts it back and goes back to loading paint cans. Moments later, he returns to the guns. He works the chamber. He removes bullets from the clip and tests them to see if they're real. He goes back to his job of stacking the paint cans, but still can't resist coming back to the guns, not once, not twice, but 9 times. His mother watched the tape.
I'm hoping he's thinking, I better call somebody.
But instead of calling somebody, Anthony stashes the gun on the top of the shelf. And when the director returns, not a word about what he'd found. The director even points to and asks about the top shelf, but Anthony volunteers nothing.
Was he planning on going back later and getting it?
I really would like to think that he wasn't going to take it.
Well, Anthony later told us he put those guns on the shelf precisely because the temptation was so strong, he was afraid he couldn't resist.
Something in my head was just telling me to just touch it and play with it and everything.
And this is just the beginning of what we found in our experiment. We'll show you a little later some of the startling things that happened. But as you watch and listen to the kids talk about the overwhelming temptation, remember the stakes. We hear about the Santanas and the Columbines. But we don't hear that every day 10 children are killed by guns in the United States. Nearly every day a fatal accidental shooting. Another terrifying 911 call.
Please hurry. Please.
A plea for a friend.
I just accidentally shot my friend.
A brother.
My brother got shot in his heart.
A sister.
Somebody help me! My sister's about to die!
15-year-old Josh Romero, Yakima, Washington, was sure he knew how to handle a gun and that he loved his little sister, Giselle. Unbeknownst to Josh, one of his friends hid a .38 caliber revolver in a boxing glove in his closet. The next morning, Josh found it. He took the gun out to show it to Giselle. He says he was sure it wouldn't fire, and even aimed it at the wall and pulled the trigger to be safe, and nothing happened. So as a joke, he pointed it at Giselle. His little sister rolled backwards down the stairs. She had been shot in the face.
Please hurry, man, she was shot in the head. Hurry, man, please.
I put my head on her heart to see if it was still beating. I was telling the operator that her pulse was getting weak and they could please hurry up.
Is she breathing? I don't know, I can't tell. Is her chest moving up and down?
And I just laid beside her telling her I love her and don't leave.
As Giselle was rushed out of their house on a stretcher, Josh could barely make it to the police car, cowering under his jacket. And if you think familiarity with guns makes a difference in the way teenagers behave, exuberant 15-year-old Efrain Casas Jr. could have been a poster boy for the National Rifle Association. His mother, Terry, says Efrain had been trained to use his father's pistols.
He knew everything about them. He was in scouting and he took gun safety. He knew what to do with them.
Their son had even earned a merit badge in the safe handling of weapons. Yet, when his father was away working the late shift, Efrain and his 16-year-old friend, Eddie Rivera, took two .22 caliber semi-automatic pistols out from under the bed, where Efrain's father left them in an unlocked case with the ammunition clips beside them. Until now, Eddie has never talked at night. He says Efrain had an idea.
You said you want to play a game? I was like, what game?
Efrain's girlfriend Jackie was on the telephone and confirms it seemed playful, a contest to see who could draw and cock his gun the fastest.
And he's like, Eddie, are you ready?
I say yes.
And he counted to 3.
And then we put the clip in and cock it back. And the guns just went off.
Efrain had a bullet in his temple, Eddie a bullet in his spine. Jackie, still on the phone, thought they were playing a joke on her.
And I counted to 10 and he didn't come to the phone, so I hung it up.
A dial tone came after it.
After 5 hours, Efrain's father came home from work.
Oh, God, my son's been shot. Please come. Please come. Hear him breathing. Come up.
All
please
right.
get here, please.
Ambulance is
Oh,
on the way.
God. Oh, God.
Ma'am.
And then a frantic search for the guns he'd left where the boys could find them.
There's 2 guns?
There were 2 guns. I can't find the other. Oh, my God. It's under him. Oh, God. So please hurry, please.
Eddie, completely paralyzed, could only watch a father's agony.
He sat down, he's holding his son's hand, rubbing his head and giving him a kiss on his head. He was praying to the Lord for forgiveness and for his son not to die.
Efrain died at noon the next day. Eddie, who had once been a gregarious 16-year-old full of life, an avid rollerblader, now...
How much feeling do you have in your legs?
None. I have no feeling.
1, 2, 3.
One more case of 2 kids playing a game with guns, 2 families shattered by the consequences. And as so many times with teenagers, the same bewildered response.
You knew how dangerous guns were, right?
Yes.
So why didn't something stop you? Why didn't anything scare you?
I don't know.
Which brings us back to our experiment. If these guns had been loaded, would these kids also be players in a tragedy?
Some of the kids had recently received a gun safety lecture.
Of all the kids we watched, we figured this young man would have no hesitation about what to do. His name is Demetrius. At the Yonkers YMCA, he's a lifeguard, a good student, a role model to 6 younger brothers and sisters. And what did Demetrius tell us about having a gun?
Only people that should have guns are cops.
In fact, Demetrius's grandfather is a cop who taught him all about the dangers of guns.
And he showed me how to use a gun. He showed me what are the do's and the don't, and you know, what you're not supposed to do with a gun.
Practically the whole family is in law enforcement, and his mother was confident of her children.
It's like you go to a family barbecue and everybody has a gun. We're raised around that, so they wouldn't have a curiosity to go after it.
Demetrius told us he would never bring a gun home because he knows accidents do happen.
I would have put like everybody's life on the line in my house. You know, that they're all young kids. You know, and I would have had to live with that, saying, because I made a dumb choice, I, killed my sister or my brother.
So we watch as Demetrius goes in to move those paint cans from the shelves, where this time we stash just one. the semi-automatic. He finds it with no trouble. Starts to load the clip and then clears the chamber like a pro. Then watch what Demetrius does next. He stashes the gun in his waistband. And now he bends down to retrieve the bullet he ejected.
Oh, beautiful, bro.
And when the director returns, not a word about what he's found. And now Demetrius, the lifeguard and grandson of a cop, heads for the door, still carrying our semi-automatic. But he doesn't get far because the police officers are waiting in the next room. The YMCA director tells Demetrius he's been part of our experiment. He isn't in any trouble. And Demetrius hands over the weapon. And when we showed the tape to Demetrius's mother,
Oh my goodness.
she says that finding that gun transformed her model son. She barely recognized him in that room.
His whole persona changed. His gestures, his body language, his attitude. It was like, I'm this big man. I have this gun, you know?
Demetrius later insisted to his mother and to us that he was going to give the gun to the YMCA director.
The way I looked like I was gonna take it, but my reactions were to take it and like give it to him.
And I heard, of course, his take, which is totally opposite of what I heard and of what I saw.
And here's another young man we'll call Michael. Michael does what every parent would hope his child would do upon finding. He heads for the door and gets the director and blows the whistle on what he's found.
What is it? Let me see.
But there's just one problem. This apparent act of civic duty is not what it might seem. As you'll see if you watch Michael from the beginning as he enters the room with a friend. Remember, he turns in one gun, but we planted two. Upon discovering them, Michael immediately sends his friend out of the room to get the director. Now, watch closely what Michael does next. That's the semi-automatic pistol going into one pocket, and the loaded clip in the other. But then he changes his mind and decides to stash the semi-automatic in a plastic bag and plants the bag on a chair near the door. Only then does he pick up the other gun, the revolver, and head off to make a show of turning it in. But now, as he's leaving with the director, watch that bag he stashed on the chair, the one with the pistol inside. He doesn't get far because our police officers are waiting in the next room.
He said he was just curious, but I knew the magazine was missing, and when I asked him, is there anything else you have, he came out with the magazine and the .357 dummy rounds.
Michael's trick is so ingenious it would almost be funny, except for one thing. Who knows where he might have been headed with a real semi-automatic pistol and a clip full of ammunition.
When we tell kids not to drink and drive, it doesn't make a difference. When we tell them to use a condom when they're having sex, it doesn't make a difference.
Dr. Marty wonders why adults seem to think teens will be any different around guns.
They have a very strong sense of invulnerability. They know that a gun can be dangerous, but they're still going to pick it up.
Just like Josh Romero, just like Eddie Rivera. Still ahead, we're going to tell you about their surprising fates and a final teen in our experiment, the one who shocked us most of all.
One last astonishing hidden camera experiment. When Primetime Thursday continues after...
Here's a statistic to keep in mind. 43% of American homes with children have guns in them. So if you don't, chances are one of your neighbors does. Raising the question again, how should we punish kids who cause tragedies by playing with guns adults have left in harm's way? Remember Josh Romero, who says he's tormented by the memory of the day he took a gun a friend had put inside his closet and accidentally shot his little sister, Giselle.
I just lay beside her, telling her I love her and don't leave.
He admits that at first he told the 911 dispatcher that intruders had fired the gun.
He ran up in my room and I was downstairs.
Where are they now?
I don't know.
Josh's mother says she understands why he made up that story.
He was scared to death that I wasn't going to want to be with him, that I wasn't going to love him anymore, I wasn't going to be his mom, that I was going to blame him.
She doesn't, but the courts did. And tonight, Josh is sitting in a Washington state prison convicted of second-degree manslaughter, which means 14 years with no parole.
I have to go on every day knowing I can't see my little sister never again. That's the biggest punishment of my life.
His mother argues her son is suffering even more for what she says was clearly an adolescent accident.
He was beating his head on the wall. He was crying uncontrollably. Is that what a murderer does?
It is in the nature of teenagers that they make mistakes.
Robin Shello, a Milwaukee criminal defense attorney, says prosecutors just don't get it. So many kids don't grasp how easily guns will fire.
And now, in Milwaukee, we've hit an all-time low.
Shello argues that only a system gone mad would prosecute the paralyzed boy Eddie Rivera, her client, who played that deadly game with his friend Efrain Casas and played it with guns they got from under Efrain's father's bed.
If the goal is, let's prevent tragedies like this, the criminal courts are not the place to do it.
We have charged him with what we believe the evidence shows he did, and that is second-degree reckless homicide.
Assistant DA Stephen Licata argues that if you take a risk, you face the charges, even if it was kids at play, even if you're paralyzed.
The willingness to take a chance with that firearm in terms of playing this game, pointing it at a human being, pulling the trigger, that is not an accident.
This was stupid, impulsive teenagers playing. There was no intent to hurt anybody.
My response is, so what? If I put this gun up to someone's head, I sneeze, or somebody pushes me, and my finger pulls the trigger and I blow their brains out, I'm not guilty of reckless homicide?
After 2 weeks, the judge had first a conclusion.
I am absolutely certain that Rivera did not intend to kill Mr. Casas. I am satisfied that Mr. Casas did not intend to try to kill Mr. Rivera. This was a tragic accident.
And finally, his verdict.
Mr. Rivera is guilty of second-degree reckless homicide beyond a reasonable doubt.
The sentence was that Eddie Rivera should simply go home, a felon and a quadriplegic. But there were two reactions that confounded us. Mr. Casas, who left his guns under the bed and loved his dead son more than life, still blames the teens, not the seduction of loaded pistols.
Should I have, locked them up? Should I have not had them? And I think, again, based on the way I raised him and the way he behaved and the sense of responsibility he showed me, I didn't feel undue, I should say, guilt.
And amazingly, the father of Eddie, the paralyzed boy, agrees.
You can't watch your kids 24 hours a day. And knowing the kids, even if you put things in places where you don't think they'll look, eventually, they're going to find something.
But are adults in denial about teenagers and how much responsibility we can expect? Is it possible that even those traumatized by violence are still going to act like adolescents around guns?
Alex was the one person that I was adamant that he wouldn't even touch the gun.
Beth Slasky, the club's teen center director in Allentown, was sure about 13-year-old Alex because she'd come to know him like family. Last spring, he had come to her devastated, looking for comfort. His best friend had been shot and killed on the street.
His question to me was, Mom,
him? Why him? Why him?
Beth and Alex went together to mourn his friend.
We saw the blood and we saw the bullet holes at the scene, and he just melted in my arms and just cried and cried and cried. We held each other, and it was, I thought he got it.
A few weeks later, when we came to Allentown to conduct our test, guess who walked into our experiment? We watched as Alex went into the room. His mother watched too, along with Alex's 6-year-old brother. That's Alex with his back to the camera. He spots the bag in the weight box and picks it up. And now, watch what he does next.
Oh, God.
The kid whose best friend had just been shot and killed aims the semi-automatic straight at his companion.
My mom think I was buried and brought back to life because I wasn't expecting my child to pick it up, but to actually point it, not to a stranger, but to his own friend. That's when I said, oh my God, what is he doing?
And Alex isn't through. He puts it back in the bag and then goes over to the locker and starts to stash the gun. Then he changes his mind and takes it out again. Finally, he heads for the door and keeps on going, where he's met by his friend Beth, the teen center director. Alex comes clean and tells Beth about the gun, and that it was almost as if the gun had some hold on him.
What went through your head that moment as you were pointing it to Anthony?
I was sad, everything, but I couldn't even think.
And just what was he doing stashing the gun in that locker? Alex admitted that he was planning to come back for it later with his friend.
Let me hide it so no one will find out. Just keep it for me and Anthony.
Obviously, there's something that's not clicking. They see their family members being shot. They see their loved ones being shot, and that's not enough. What more can we do to educate the kids is the question.
So in the end, what was the final result of our experiment? Well, first of all, most of the teens in Allentown did go and tell the teen center director what they found. But for many of them, if the weapons hadn't been disabled, it might have been too late. While in Yonkers, out of 16 groups of teens who found the guns, fewer than half, 7, told an adult about what they found.
Everyone suffers when a person gets shot.
Which leaves us, of course, with the more fundamental question. Is education the answer? And what can be done to protect Alex and all the other boys as long as they live in a world full of guns?
We want to say again that both the parents and the children gave us permission to televise the results of our experiment. And another note, last year the American Academy of Pediatrics called for a kind of domestic disarmament, asking parents to keep guns totally out of the reach of any child, or preferably get them out of the home. Still later in our broadcast, we're going to take another look at what happens when small children find guns in a home, as so many of them will.
Still to come.
Just thank you. Now live at a memorial service underway this evening near Santee, California, a town that is mourning 2 teenagers gunned down this week, their 15-year-old schoolmate in custody. Tonight, John Quinones has exclusive new details about that day at Santana High School. And for the first time, you'll meet the local heroes.
It was just pandemonium. It was chaos. There were people running, tripping over each other, backpacks flying.
Some of them are bleeding. They're frantic. They're yelling. They're screaming.
This is the story you haven't heard of 6 brave men who risked their lives to stop what could have been a massacre. 4 sheriff's deputies, an off-duty cop, and a school security guard, Pete Ruiz Jr.
Things kind of were just normal, mellow. Bell rang. I heard the first firecrackers, crackling noises.
He carried a walkie-talkie, not as he entered the bathroom to investigate. He had no idea that inside this stall, 15-year-old Andy Williams was reloading his long-barreled .22 caliber revolver.
I walked in there, heard, saw the two students on the ground. One looked at me and said, you know what, get out, get out, get out.
Confused, Ruiz backs out into the hallway and radios for help. Suddenly, he hears more shots and now calls out, 2 down in the boys' room. And then...
Felt something hit me in the back and just tried to get a few more steps out of it, and I just collapsed on the ground. It seemed like everything was going really fast, but at the same time, everything was going slow.
Ruiz is hit 3 times, his shoulder, his right side, his lower back.
The one in my pelvic bones, the one that, if it was a few inches on my part or his part, could have put me in a wheelchair.
He's down, bleeding, unable to move, and then he looks up into the eyes of the young gunman.
He had his gun in his hand right by his head, and he turned and looked at me, and we looked at each other, and I was kind of like, hey, in the sense of, you know, all right, it's time to stop. And basically, I was a sitting duck, pretty much, yeah.
He looked at you. Well, why do you think he didn't shoot again?
Honestly, I can't tell you that one. Easily, he could have walked up and shot me point blank right there. And
drove in the front lot and looked at the clock on the dash and said 9:22.
By coincidence, Robert Clark, an off-duty San Diego police officer, is pulling up to register his daughter at school.
I asked a faculty member, you know, what's going on, and he said there'd been shots fired on campus.
Instinctively, he runs against the stream of fleeing students along a wall leading to the boys' bathroom toward the gunfire.
I'm looking over my shoulder yelling, I'm a cop, just to make sure they know who I am. And young people yelling, you know, the suspect's in the boys' room right there. So I stopped right at the corner there, and so the bathroom would have been off to my right, and the doorway I was just slightly out of view.
What did it feel like going down all by yourself?
I just, you know, I'm a cop, I'm paid to do this. I'm also a SWAT officer. And
so you went right into the SWAT mode?
There was no fear. There was no, I mean, I'm walking in there with a 9mm, you know, 2 magazines of ammo, no vest, no radio, no backup.
As far as Robert Clark knew, he was the only law enforcement officer anywhere near this campus. Now, he had his service revolver, but because he was off duty, he was without any other vital police equipment, like one of the things he needed most, his 2-way radio to call for help. He had no idea that at that very moment, help was racing up this driveway. 4 deputies from the local sheriff's department.
And that's one of the things I asked on the radio is, are there the shots still being fired? And
Sheriff's Deputy Ali Perez.
And when they came back and said, yeah, they're still shooting in the school, one of the things that flashed through my mind was, you know, another Columbine. And it's just it's overwhelming.
It was just turmoil.
Deputy Jack Smith.
And still you kept going in?
Yeah. Right.
Not knowing what the heck was
Not
going on.
knowing if we had 1 shooter, 2 shooters. Was he in front of us? Was he behind us? Was there a sniper? We didn't know.
Does fear figure in at all?
I didn't have time to think about it. All I had time to think about was we had to get in there.
And so they move in. Deputy Smith and Perez head for the bathroom where they meet Officer Clark. One deputy takes up a position aiming his shotgun at the door. Another circles around to a grassy area behind this block of classrooms.
When I came across, I saw a student that was face down in the grass with blood from the back of his head, and he was not moving. I mean, at that point, he appeared to be lifeless.
Now a team, the 5 officers storm the bathroom and come face to face with the killer.
When you walk in the door to the bathroom, you're risking your life.
Yeah, that's right.
Any second thoughts to that?
No, there's no second thoughts. When you got a shooter in a high school and he's killing students, you can't even blink an eye. You got to move.
At that point, I told him, drop the gun, at which he did right away.
What struck you about this young man, Andy, and the way he looked?
He looked unremorseful. Just like I'm looking at you. I mean, as far as just calm, relaxed.
As if nothing had happened.
Nothing happened.
I can just picture him smiling because, you know, I saw him smile all the time.
The gunman's best friends, A.J. Gilbert, 14, and Josh Stevens, 15, both knew of Andy's plans, but say they didn't believe him. They now realize the horrific consequences of not speaking up.
Josh, this has really affected you. Obviously.
Yeah.
And there's something else they tell us. Along with Andy formed a rock band called Army of the Wicked. Andy's favorite song is by the band Linkin Park. It's called In the End. Tonight, especially chilling are the song's lyrics. Things aren't the way they were before. You wouldn't even recognize me anymore.
What is it you would say to him?
That I'm with him and I know that he's not that bad person, and I hope I see him again.
But the men who risked their lives in the hallways that day also have something to say to Andy.
I'd probably ask the question that every other American would ask, why? Did you not think about, the consequences? Did you not think about the lives that you're shattering?
And yet it could have been so much worse. Consider this. 6 men put an end to the madness less than 6 minutes after the shooting began. But don't call them heroes.
No, I just figured I was doing my job to the best of my ability with my team members.
And we had to stop this from this happening. These are children.
What if it means risking your life?
Then that's what it means. I'll put my training and experience and my protective equipment against that situation for the children without hesitation.
Students have returned to Santana High School now, but noticeably absent are the suspects' friends, the boys you just met, A.J. Gilbert and Josh Stevens. School officials told them they should finish out the year at another high school, not as a punishment, but for their own safety and to avoid any further disturbances. If you want more information on school shootings and the warning signs that should not be ignored, log on to abcnews.com. And when we come back, what will very young children do with real guns? No one is watching. The truth about child's play. Stay with us.
Years ago, when we performed another experiment. It was right after the Columbine shootings, and this time we hid disabled guns in a daycare center playroom where young children could find them. And find them they did.
Remember these kids who were having the time of their lives? These guns are real, and time and again they signal they know it.
Someone's coming, they're coming, they're coming. Hide the guns, hide the guns.
These children were ages 3 to 8, and half of them had been given a course on what to do when they see a gun.
And you can never play with guns.
They were also shown a videotape that the NRA touts as a real deterrent to accidental shootings. But watch what happened after the lecture. We planted disabled handguns in a playroom. We sent children in 2 by 2.
A gun.
Most of the found the guns, and more than half far preferred them to any toy. A pretend shootout at high noon. A virtual Annie Oakley. Cops and robbers.
Put your hands up.
And if the guns had been loaded,
Shoot me.
this scene could have been real too. Most of the kids just couldn't resist them, and the children who got the lecture played just as dangerously. In that first report, we also showed some surprised parents how their hidden guns were no secret to their young kids. This father watches as his 10-year-old daughter goes to the bedside nightstand. Her father warns her to stop.
You got to stop with that.
Little Michelle let out a gasp.
Woo.
It was a .38 revolver, unlocked, and as her father showed us, fully loaded. And just one of several in the house.
Would you ever have suspected that Michelle knew where the gun was?
No, not whatsoever.
And how accessible are the guns in your neighbors' houses? Listen to 10-year-old Brandon describe what happened one day at a friend's house. He says his playmate was showing off.
He had his friend's gun behind his door, and his mom and dad didn't know about it, and he took it out behind it, and he was pointing it around the room, and he was starting to get it towards me, and I ducked.
We played the tape for Brandon's father.
You know, that clip right there gives you a jar. First time I've heard about it.
But most striking to us was what happened when Matthew, the young son of the expert you met earlier tonight, Dr. Marjorie Hardy, participated in our experiment. Her son, she said back then, had been trained so well he'd never touch a gun. But 15 minutes after walking into the playroom,
I won't touch guns.
touching a gun.
This little boy who would never touch a gun, who had been trained to avoid them, opened fire.
I would have thought if any kid could resist it, Matthew could. That Matthew could or Matthew would, and he didn't. As a mother, I'm just devastated, and I'm scared to let him out of my sight.
He's dead. He's dead.
After we first showed you this experiment, we were inundated with emails and phone calls from parents who told us that they were going to get the guns out of their homes. We followed some of you as you turned them in to local police or traded them in at pawn shops.
We also heard from a lot of you who felt quite differently, including the NRA. The discussion about kids and guns will continue tonight on Nightline, and that's after your local news.
That's our program for tonight. I'm Diane Sawyer.